Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us one more time. We have just finished talking about how you can hook Azure up to the back end of your Windows Phone, Windows Store applications. One of the things I had promised in that particular session was a little bit of a deep dive into some mobile services functionality, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing over the next little while. So, what we're talking about is Windows Azure Mobile Services. And the idea behind Windows Azure Mobile Services was really to provide almost as a package, a set of functionality that a developer of mobile apps, a developer of apps that are running on tablets would be able to take advantage of very quickly, very easily. It's designed to provide a lot of the functionality that you want to have in a nice, tidy, easy to use package. Could you create this stuff on your own? Absolutely, but you don't have to. It's been done for you. It works well. That's a nice combination of features when you get right down to it. So what we're going to be talking about with respect to Azure Mobile Services this time around, we're going to be talking a little bit about what the architecture is, how you can set it up, how you can actually go ahead and use it. We're going to be talking about how you can store, retrieve data, see what that looks like from your applications. There's support for things like push notification. So you can have the changes happening on the back end of your data cause toast notifications to appear inside of your applications. We're going to talk a little bit about the auth functionality that's available. It integrates with some of the more common authentication mechanisms that happen to be out there. And then how you can actually, what kind of diagnostics you have available and how you can see what your mobile service happens to be doing. So kind of as a starting point, we'll talk a little bit about what mobile services happens to be. It's a combination of, as I said, it's a combination of things that you are likely to want to have in a typical mobile application. I'm using the term mobile application, and to a certain extent that's not quite fair. It's mobile applications, it's Windows 8, Windows Store applications. Theoretically, and actually not even theoretically, realistically, you can actually do it from pretty much any application at all. Mobile Services has a REST interface that will give you access to this kinds of functionality. However, the idea behind it is it's a package of features that a typical mobile application will need. Okay? It includes an HTTP endpoint that you can retrieve data from, that you can pass data to be updated, inserted, deleted. It includes the ability to have authentication be performed so that at the time that call is made to that particular endpoint, the user has been authenticated through one of a number of different mechanisms. It has the ability to perform server-side logic. That server-side logic can be validation of the information. It can automatically add values, set things like last modified date, set who the person who modified the information happens to be automatically. It can handle background scheduling of things. So the server logic is there so you can build out slightly more complicated back ends without actually needing to write any additional code. The server logic is written in JavaScript, so it's a language with which you're probably quite familiar. And so all of that gets packaged together into this thing called Windows Azure Mobile Services. As I said up front, could you do this on your own? Yes, but you have better things to do. You have, ideas in your head for phone apps, for Windows Store apps, and why not simply take advantage of the fact that this functionality has been already put together, already works together very nicely, is well documented, well tested, and it works. That last piece is actually incredibly important when you get right down to it. It works. Along with those functionalities, you have things like notifications that are available to you. So you can have something happens on your back end. Not even necessarily something that's happening through your application, but you can have notifications be pushed out to your applications through Windows notification services. So the kind of example would this be, oh, look, every 15 minutes you check to see whether a Twitter feed has been updated. You grab the information, you do a push notification out to your application, WNS pops up a toast message inside of your app. So that's all built into Azure. You've got diagnostic capabilities. You can put console logging messages or error messages so that you can track what goes on and see what's happening inside of the scripts that are running on the server-side logic. The logging it happens to be there, and you've got the ability to scale it out. So similar to what when we were talking about what you could do with websites, you can crank a dial and you can increase the support on the back end for large volumes of simultaneous users. And the amount of time it takes to turn that knob and crank it up is very fast, on the order of seconds. And if it happens to be that your pattern is bursting and then, after a couple of days of heavy usage, it starts to die back down again, you can crank that dial down and you can go back to where you were before, paying only for the functionality, only for the resources that you happen to have used over that period of time. So you don't have to buy to be able to handle the maximum. You can crank it up, maximum number of users, crank it back down when you're not. It ends up being a very cost-effective way to handle that back-end functionality. So let's start by actually walking through Windows Azure Mobile Services. We're going to walk through some of the functionality that happens to be out there. We'll see how we'll see how it lays out and how all of it can flow together. And so you get the ability to have your decision as to whether or not it's the kind of thing you want to use. And honestly, I believe it should be. So I'm going to start by taking a look at my Windows Azure Management Portal. And this, again, if you haven't created yourself an Azure account yet, you've got a 90-day free trial that you can get. I highly recommend doing it. It is give you a chance to play with all of the stuff that's available out there in Azure without incurring any costs. And these are the kinds of things you really want to be aware of and want to have a chance to play with. It is, as you start to kind of go through it, you'll always find areas you can use these things. It changes your approach to how to solve very, very common problems. For what we're going to do, I'm going to work through the creation of a mobile service. And so my creation of a mobile service, I go through the new button, I click on mobile service, I click on create, and it pops up with a dialog box. And my dialog has the, I need to specify the header on a URL, so I'm going to go with, and it tells me with the little green arrow says it happens to like me. I've got the ability to use an existing SQL database instance. I've got the ability to create a new database instance. I'm going to use the existing one for the moment. I select a subscription against which I want to have my mobile service work. I have a region. You'll notice that I can have these be in any one of the regions around the world that Azure happens to have running. Because I want to use an existing database instance, I get to pick the database I happen to want to use. In my case, I'm going to use that particular existing database. And I provide the credentials to be able to log in. And it likes my password, which is always a good thing. And I click on the checkbox, and lo and behold, it is going out and creating a mobile service. One of the things you'll notice is that the amount of time it takes to create a mobile service is surprisingly small. It doesn't take very much time at all. He says that while it's still going off and creating. Because there was some setup stuff I had to do and some things that I'll walk you through a little bit later on, I have actually already set up this AZ Dev Camp. So I'm going to kind of work through that and work my demos through that and explain why it is that I'm tying to an existing one as I go through it. But when your mobile service is ready, you have this dashboard that pops up. And you can see across the top, there's a number of different pieces of functionality that you have available to you. Access to the data, access to a background scheduling process, push notification information, authentication information, and we'll be showing you some more of that a little bit later on. This quick start dashboard has got one of the nicest ways to get introduced to what mobile services is capable of doing. And that is, you can specify for a given platform, I want to be able to create a new app, or I want to be able to connect to an existing one. And the idea here is that if you want to create to a new one, for example, if you click on it, you have got 3 steps that you have to do. You can install Visual Studio, install the Mobile Services SDK. If you have Visual Studio installed, great. You do need to make sure you've got the Mobile Services SDK installed in order to be able to take advantage of this on the client side. You end up with this one button option to be able to create a to-do item table, and that will, you click on the button, it creates a to-do item table that I will show you in just a couple of seconds. And then I can download my application. And when I click on download, guess what? It pops up with a little, do I want to download this azdevcamp.zip. And inside that zip file is a Windows Store application, because that was the choice I made up here, that is tied specifically to my this particular mobile service. And at the time I do that, it's now capable of running, and it will connect back and forth with the with this mobile service. So let me show you what that app is going to look like. This is the project when you open it up. It is a standard Windows Store application. If you run the application, I've got over here, this is an incredibly sophisticated user interface. It's beautiful in the kind of ways that I would normally design. You go in here, you specify, actually, I'm sorry, we have to do it this way. A requirement. You click on save. It has taken that information and it has pushed that back to the mobile service. Okay? It's simple, straightforward at that particular level. So if I shut the application down, come back into my mobile service, take a look at the data tab, you'll notice that I have this to-do item, and oh look, I have that one record. And you spin it up and there is the text that I specified, hello world, okay? Was pushed from that Windows application into my mobile service. So let's take a couple of seconds, take a look at exactly what went on under the covers to be able to make that happen. You can see how little code is actually required to be able to pull this off. So first of all, you take a look at the app.xaml.cs file. And what you notice is that I have as this public static, I have an instance of a mobile service client class. That mobile service client class, by the way, is one of the things that you needed to download the mobile services SDK for. That's where it happens to be implemented. And in fact, in order to be able to have access to this, if you're trying to create this in a new project, there is this Windows Azure Mobile Services Managed Client that you need to add as a reference to your application in order to be able to do the client-side functionality we're about to show. Okay, so you'll notice that the constructor for the mobile services client takes my endpoint, and it takes this string of gibberish. This string is actually a key that is used to authenticate you to mobile services, so it's secret. Please don't write that down, all people who are now taking screen caps of this. It's something that you should protect within your application, okay? So you need to treat it as if it's a valuable piece of information. So I end up with this mobile service. I create this as a static. I instantiate it so it's all up there and running, and that's the starting point of what I need to do. So now if I go over to my main page.xaml is the one that had all of that nice functionality on it. If you take a look right here, what you will notice is that I have got a class, simple class, nothing magical about it at all. It is ID, text, and complete. One of the really nice things about the way Azure Mobile Services works is you just simply send it a class. It serializes that class into JSON, and then on the back end, it deserializes it, figures out what database it needs to go in based on the name of the class. So in other words, the fact that this is to-do item and that this is to-do item right there is not a coincidence. It's a requirement, okay? So it matches them up at that particular level. I've got ID, I've got text, and I've got complete. If I did not have these data member, the name properties in the data member set, then you would see as columns in that database, you would see text and complete. But because I have the name set, it's going to lowercase them. And so now when you go take a look, lo and behold, my columns are text and complete. So I've got that mapping between an object, a data transfer object that I'm sending over to Azure Mobile Services, and the fact that it will just simply lay that information out, match them up, property name to column name, and assign values. Okay, so that's my data transfer object between these two different levels. Now, in terms of how I'm building this out from a functional perspective, I have got right here a to-do table. And a to-do table is an instance of this iMobile service table, a generic interface that takes my class name. And this is a reference to the to-do table for my mobile service. And as you start to look through the functionality, here's insert to-do item. When I clicked on the button you saw me click on before, it executed this piece of code. And you can see what this piece of code would do is it goes to my to-do table. It calls a method called insert async, passing my data transfer object. It's asynchronous, so I use the await keyword to be able to handle that the asynchronicity of it. And it inserts the item. That's all there is to it. Okay, so it's not like you had to establish connections or do anything like that. That's all built into the reference related to this to-do table. You just simply call insert async and it inserts. Okay, the update async, same thing. You make a change to an item. Okay, you'll notice the item here happens to be a to-do item as before. You call update async using the await, using that same reference to the to-do table, and lo and behold, it updates. It uses the ID key to match it up, finds the item in the data store, makes changes, off it goes. It's that simple from an update perspective. Delete, same thing. There's a delete async. You pass in the ID, it gets deleted. That's, again, that's the simple side of it. The fourth function, this would be the R in my CRUD functionality, retrieval, is just as easy, and it's very nice because it supports link. So if you take a look at this particular statement here, you can see I have a reference to my mobile services table. I use the where clause to say I want to return my items where complete equals false. Okay, standard link functionality. The toCollection view causes that link statement to be executed. So at the time I call toCollection view, it goes across the wire, passing along the where clause as an expression that gets processed on the server side. That expression, by the way, gets converted into, this is a SQL backend, so it gets converted into SQL, executed against the SQL store. The information comes back and I end up with a collection of items. And in this case, I take my items and I push them on as an item source on the list that happens to be out there. That is the functionality of your CRUD at a very, very basic, very fundamental level. As you can see, not a lot of coding is necessary, not a lot of effort that has to be done. Fits very nicely into the paradigm in which you happen to be working. Okay, so very, very sweet piece of functionality. Now, one of the things that I said about Azure Mobile Services is it does have the ability to have scripting being performed. So if I come into my mobile service again, for a given table, I have got a script option that's available to me. And my script option has got some functionality. This is I want to say I've added this already, and actually I'll do it this way because you can see what it looks like when there's nothing there. So if I come in here and I say update, this is what the update function looks like when there's nothing. This is the default behavior. There is a JavaScript function available to you on the server side that executes every time somebody attempts to update a record. And you can put logic in this script using JavaScript that executes at that particular time. The same thing applies to things like a read. And the kind of thing you're going to typically do inside of here would be, I want to arrange so that I'm only going to read records that have a date that is sometime in the future. And you can add that filter onto this particular request. You'll see that a query happens to be coming in here. This query object has a where clause. That where clause can say, where date is in future. And it will add that to whatever criteria is also included in the query that's being passed in. So you have on the server side that ability to filter out what happens to be going on. Now, to kind of go back to the insert that we looked at initially, we talk about another functionality, another piece of functionality that is available to Azure, and that is the ability to do push notifications. And so if you take a look at this particular piece of functionality right here, what you can see is I'm doing an insert. This request execute says, whatever request has come in, I want to execute you. And then one of the parameters you pass in is an object, a JavaScript object, where my success property is a function that gets executed on successful invocation, and an error property that here's the function that gets executed if there was a problem with my insertion. And in my success function, you can see I'm saying I want to do a respond here, which is I want to say everything worked fine. And I want to call this JavaScript function called send notifications. So for send notifications, there is a little bit more functionality. And now you get to start to see the kind of complexity that you can have on your server-side scripting. Because what this is going to do is it's going to grab a table called channel. We're going to be creating channel in just a couple of seconds. Okay. Inside of that channel table, I can read, grab all of my channel items, and then for each of the channels that I retrieve, I want to call send toast to the URI that's related to that particular channel. And that send toast text 04 is a built-in function. Push is an object that's available to you on the server-side scripting. And the WNS object is an object that's related to doing Windows notification services. You call send toast text, and it will push to the URI that's specified here. It will push this particular information. So now every time an item gets inserted into the to-do item list, I will see a notification. Also, we mentioned the idea that there's logging. Here you'll see that in terms of my send toast text, I've also got a success and a failure function. On success, I say, yay, something worked. On failure, I say, something didn't work. Here's the error message. So you can see what is going on inside of your functionality. So this becomes the script for your insert capability. Now, let's kind of wire this together so you can see all of it work. First of all, you'll notice that according to this, I'm going to get a table called channel. Well, I don't have that table yet, so why don't I create one? Back in my Azure mobile service, underneath the data tab, I have a little create button. I click on create, and I can create a table. Now, what you'll notice here is, again, I have got permissions for each of my CRUD functions. I can say anybody can do an insert. Anybody with an application key can do an insert. If you recall back when we set up the static with the mobile services client, there was a text of gibberish there. That's your application key. I can have only authenticated users do it, which means that the only people who can actually go in and do an insert are people that have authenticated against Microsoft account or Twitter or Facebook or Google. I can say only scripts and admins can do it, so the only people who can actually put stuff into this table are scripts that are running behind the scenes. So I'm going to just simply leave the default here, pass that up there, and it is going to, well, it did create that, which is nice. It created my channel correctly. You'll notice that my channel sits out there as 0, which is fine for the moment. So at this moment, I have got a mobile service. I have got some functionality on my insert that actually will do push notifications. I have added my channel table out there, and all of that is fine and wonderful. Let me go back to my client and add bits and pieces of functionality that will allow me to actually receive the push notification. So if I come back into here, I have got some functionality that I want to add into in particular to my app class. So when my application launches, I want to do a number of different things. So right in here, I'm going to grab that block of code, and I am going to add that right there. So what this code is doing is the following. Right? I have, again, built into the Azure Mobile Services SDK, I have this push notification channel manager. And if you're ever looking for method names that are quite descriptive of what they're doing, I have the create push notification channel for application async. Now, for those of you who can't figure this out, what this is going to do is it's going to create a push notification channel for your application, and it's asynchronous. Yes, I know. This is why writing exam questions from Microsoft is becoming harder and harder. It's tough to not know exactly what that method is doing right there. So once I have this, object that comes back, which is a mechanism for being able to actually create that channel, I am going to create my channel DTO object. And my channel object itself, I have this class down here, which consists of an ID, it consists of a URI, and it has a date on which this is going to expire. So this is my data transfer object that I'm going to use to send my channel information off to my mobile service. So I'm creating my channel data transfer object. I get my ID. So my channel ID is coming across as an integer out of my local settings. What that does is that allows me to actually keep track of what my channel ID happens to be. And then I've also got a URI that's going on. Now, what you'll notice is that in my local settings, when I'm grabbing my channel ID, if it hasn't been set yet, I do an insert async of this channel. Okay, so I'm going to take my channel object, push it back in, grab a channel ID that is part of my insert, and have it come back. And so by the time I get to this particular point here, I will have that channel ID. And so now the idea here is that I'm an application, I'm running. I want to publish into that channel table the fact that this application wants to be notified. It takes the URI that's coming out of my channel, includes that in the information. When Azure wants to, when mobile services wants to send me a notification, it needs that URI. So I keep track of what my channel ID happens to be. Azure Mobile Services keeps track of the channels in that channel table. And if you recall, when an insert takes place, it grabs every channel, loops through it, sends out a notification, a toast notification to every URI that happens to be in that channel, and I will end up receiving that particular information back again. Okay? So given this, I can now run this. Now I will give you just a bit of a warning while I'm waiting for this to run. I ran this as a local machine. If you try and run this as a simulator, you're going to find that it doesn't work the way you're expecting. Specifically, you'll end up getting a message saying it's unable to actually use the create the push channel. I'm not sure what the details of that are. I'm not sure why that's happening, but I do know that if you try and do this in a simulator, you're going to find it isn't going to get you what you want. So we've run the application. We have created the channel, and in fact, if you go and take a look in the channel itself, you'll notice that I have a record now that I didn't have before, right? There's my URI, there's my expiration. That was created when I pushed my application out. So back to my application. Back to my application. There it is. I'm going to type in an item, save it. There is my toast notification, exactly as you would expect. The text was there, text line 1, text line 2, exactly as we promised. Okay, so we were able to actually have that notification come across, and we were able to have it appear within our application. Now, I'm heading back to my mobile service. I'm going to come back up into here. Now, one of the things, if you recall, when we were in the scripting for the to-do item, there was logging information that we kept. That is visible through the logs chart, and here is the logging information that we happen to have had. We've had, as you can see, I've done more than one thing, but the idea is that the last thing I did was the to-do item insert. It actually sent a status code 200. Here's the channel it happened to go to. So this is the way you get the logging information. And the difference between a log and an error happens to be whether or not you get a black icon or an exclamation, a red exclamation mark icon in this particular level. And if I go back into my, if I go back into here again, sorry, one back too far, into data, into my to-do item, into my script, you can see that the difference here is the difference between log at this level and error at this level, and that's how you actually push your information out. So what we've seen at this point is we've got the mobile service, we've got data being able to flow back and forth with CRUD functionality. I'm able to have push notifications be able to come up. I'm able to actually log the information and be able to track what goes wrong or what doesn't go wrong inside of my on the server side of my mobile service. And as you see, not a lot of work you had to put in from a coding perspective in order to have all of that functionality just available to you within your application. That is the real key to mobile services. Really slick, really neat functionality, really useful functionality, not a lot of coding. As I said, very, very nice combination. So let's talk a little bit more in just terms of the details surrounding mobile services. So behind the scenes is structured storage. The structured storage is a SQL database. The default is to actually utilize a SQL database. So it builds up a SQL Server database or an Azure SQL database in the back end. You do have the ability to connect to an existing database if that's what you want. It's not necessary from that particular perspective, but it's certainly available to you if you want it. You can have your database apps partitioned by the schema that happens to be out there. So your can have different apps talking to different tables based on app identity that's available. You've got the ability to manage the data in a couple of different ways. Excuse me. You've seen how I can go in through the Azure Mobile Services portal to be able to view the data, and I can delete records through there fairly easily. I can go through the SQL Azure portal to be able to access the data. I can go through SQL Management Studio to be able to access the data, and I've got a REST-based API which will allow me to access the data as well. So I've got multiple ways for you to be able to go in and view the information that happens to be out there. On the server side, you've got a couple of things that are very slick. You've got the API is generated for storage. So as I said, you have that ability to make a REST-based call into your Azure Mobile Services endpoint and perform the same kinds of CRUD-based functionality and have the scripts that are part of, that you've defined on the server side execute just as much for the REST-based API as they are for the client side that we were showing inside of our Windows Store application. Now, the idea behind dynamic schema is a very interesting one. What it basically means is that when you pass a DTO, a data transfer object, across to the Azure Mobile Service, it takes a look at the properties on the DTO. It takes a look at the name of the class, looks up the name of the that class as a table inside of mobile services. It takes a look at the properties, looks at the columns inside of that particular table in the mobile services on the back end. If it can't find a column and dynamic schema is turned on, it will add the column. If it can't find the class, the table name, it will add the table. In other words, the very first time you pass a data transfer object, do an insert on a data transfer object into mobile services, it will create the table and create the columns for you automatically. Now, fantastic if you're in development mode. When you get into production mode, you probably do want to turn that off. And there's a very simple switch in the configuration for your mobile service. Simple click it off, and now all of a sudden dynamic schema is not going on. But when you're in the development process, it's incredibly handy to be able to use. Okay? We've already shown we can author server-side logic at any one of the CRUD functionality that happens to be there. And your querying capabilities are basically linked. You can specify any of the kinds of criteria on the properties of your data transfer objects in a where clause. You can use a link statement that will get transferred across to the back end and executed against the database in the way you would expect. It's converted into an expression. The back end handles the processing, and then it comes back through again. It's not like you have got some kind of law. It's not like I'm getting every record back and then applying the logic. All of the filtering is done on the back end on the database side. In that server-side logic, you have a number of different objects that are available to you to be able to make your life a little bit easier. So you've got access to tables. We can go and get a table. And this allows you to do things like, hey, an insert's come in. I need to check to see another table whether or not a value is there to allow me to do an insert. So I can grab, as part of my server-side logic, grab that information, run queries against it. I've got the push notification, so I can push to Windows notification. I can push to Apple notification. Those are all available within that push object for me. You've seen console with respect to doing logs. The request is the request that has come in, and I can respond with, I can execute the request to have my functionality happen. I can do a respond and send back a status code so that my client knows whether something happens to have gone on with the status codes object. And then finally, the MS SQL object that's available, that allows me to execute a raw SQL query against the back end. So I can have, as part of my server logic, build up a batch of SQL statements, call the query method on MS SQL, and it will execute them against my data store that is in the back end of my mobile service. All right. As example, that's exactly what you're looking at. Right. Top one from status updates. It runs that query. On success, it logs it into my console. Now, I mentioned that the dynamic capability. This will give you a sense of, because if you're passing something in through a REST-based API, it's coming in through JSON. JSON doesn't have things like a Boolean or a date. It has strings. And the dynamic mapping and the mapping onto the SQL types, it happens automatically based on this particular table. So if you end up passing in a string that looks like it's a numeric value, it will get converted into a float as the column inside of your data store. A Boolean gets converted into a bit. Your date time gets converted into a date time offset. Your string is an nvarchar max, so you can have as much as you want. That mapping happens automatically as part of the dynamic schema functionality that happens to be out there. We've shown you with a push notification. The push notification functionality is, again, start by requesting a channel URI, register that with the cloud service, okay, which is when we actually push the information into the channel. Okay. The authentication, your mobile service has to be set up to be recognizable by the push notification service. We didn't show that from a, in terms of how to do that. If you want to find out how to pull that off, if you come back into the quick start for your mobile service, you have the ability down here to go how to add push notification, pops you to a description that will walk you through the steps. You have to register your app with the store. You want to associate your application with this particular app. You specify your credential information, and it gives you back a URI and a client secret that you can use to actually register that information. So there's a couple of steps we didn't go through to get the push notification working, but if you click on that link on your quick start, you'll get to a place that will describe all of the steps you need to go through. So once I've authenticated, my mobile service sends a message to Windows push notification service, which goes to the notification client platform, which pops up the toast, right? And so here's my integration, right? It integrates with WNS, Windows Notification Service, to provide that toast or tile or badge notifications that are out there, okay? And it's a very simple model to be able to make it work. It was, push.windows.ns. Send toast with the text and the images of what you need to be able to push out there for you. You, as the writer of the server-side script, didn't have to handle the authentication. Automatically handled as part of the method you called on push.wns. Authentication. You can authenticate yourself, your users, with a login async call that you specify the authentication mechanism. The authentication mechanism itself, if I actually come into, let's see, I want that to be done. My line of code is right here. And for me to do that, I'm going to, on navigated to, that line of code right there will launch a window that authenticates you against Microsoft account. And if you take a look at the values in that enumeration, I've got Facebook, Google, and Twitter. And so I can authenticate against Facebook by doing that. And now you'll see, as part of the running of my application, it'll pop up with a Facebook login. And once I provide that credentials, it handles the passing of the token information back and forth. Any request that is made to the mobile service will now be authenticated, And there is a user ID available in the various server-side scripts, so I can tell who you are and perform functionality accordingly. Okay, that's got to do with my table level permissions, where you can see one of the choices was only authenticated users. That login async is the thing that turns on my authenticated users. Again, inside of that user object, I have that user ID. I've also got a level, so I can tell whether they're admins or whether they have just been authenticated or whether they're anonymous. We've talked about the diagnostics, right? So I can actually see information on API calls, some CPU functionality. I can log into that log table, error messages or log messages. The scaling is, again, very, very simple to do. On the compute side, in my mobile service, scale is what I click on. For me to be able to increase the number of instances, right, I can say, hey, oh, my reserve capacity is disabled. That's because I'm in free mode. I get into reserve mode. I can now crank this value up, crank the number of cores up, so I can have either one machine that's beefier, I can have smaller but many machines to handle, and the load balancing is done across all of that. On my database side, I've got the same functionality. If I actually take a look at my database, and this is running off of this particular database, I can specify as part of my configuration whether I want it to be 10 gig web-based. I can have that database be running on a different server completely. So I've got a lot of choices in terms of my scale, how I actually can push up the compute side or my database side, depending upon what I'm trying to do. Now, at the moment, Azure Mobile Services is in a preview. And you have, because of that, you can get 10 free mobile services that are available to you, running on shared instances. So what you saw when I tried to pump up to reserved, I'm still running in free mode. Unlimited data coming in. There's a limit of 165 megabytes of data going out. There's a 1 gig SQL database behind the scenes, and it's got to be deployed to the US East in terms of that's where it's got to be deployed in order to fit under the category of the free. Now, normally there's a service level agreement. Because this is a free preview, there's not. And you've only got the small. You can bump it up if you want to, if you need to do so. It's not that it's not ready to go. It's just simply giving you access to this functionality so you can try it out and see how it happens to work for you. As I said, it's absolutely worthwhile, okay? So here's your pricing and licensing. Again, you've got small instances available to you. There will be a service level agreement as you get up to the higher levels, where you've got 99.9 or 99.95 available to you. It's at a minimum, you've got access to the free. You give it a try. You see how easy it is to integrate into your applications and how it can greatly increase the visibility of your application to the users, because it now becomes possible to have, your back-end scheduled process can send notifications to a phone that gets popped up onto your tiles, so that when your application is sitting on your user's front page, it picks up the life that actually is one of the massively distinguishing characteristics of the Windows Phone. Or, for that matter, the Windows Store applications. You get to become part of that live experience. So, just to summarize, Windows Azure Mobile Services, data backend, notifications available to you, authentication against 4 major auth providers, server-side logic to be able to handle validation, verification, push notification, background processing, diagnostics and logging capabilities to help you figure out if something goes wrong, and the ability to scale it out. Very, very nice package, very easy to integrate into your applications. The price is free, which is pretty much as good as pricing gets when you think about it, and you get a chance to try it out. So ultimately, like I said, you've got little reason not to at least give it a try. You will find it incredibly useful for most of the kinds of applications you're likely to be writing for a Windows Store or for a Windows Phone kind of environment. If you're looking for additional resources, that first link will take you to the Mobile Services Developer Portal, where you can see some tutorials walking through what's going on. As I said, if you create yourself a mobile service, besides being able to download those sample apps for Windows 8, Windows Phone, or iOS, you can also, there are links that will take you to the authentication and the notification tutorial, so you can walk through those step by step. And the second link here is an API reference, so you can see how to handle some of the server scripting side. With that, I say thank you very much for your attention. I hope you get a chance to go out and try this stuff. I've been using it for a while now and have nothing but wondrous things to say about it. It's incredibly nice to be able to demo it, and it's very nice to even be able to use it. I have a couple of applications on the store and in the phone that take advantage of this functionality. So I actually can recommend it from a personal level much more than anything else. Give it a try. I think you're going to find it useful. Again, thank you very much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day.